America was born in rebellion, raised by revolution, fed on dreams of liberty, self-rule, and independence. From its earliest days, the story it told the world was clear. We are the land of the free, the last, best hope of Earth. But behind the myth was steel. From the genocide of Native Americans to the enslavement of millions, America's greatness was always built on contradiction, and it didn't stop at home. By the early 1900s, the U.S. had grown bold. It had taken Cuba from Spain, carved the Philippines with gunships, sent troops into Haiti, Nicaragua, and Mexico to protect banks and sugar plantations. It called it stabilization. Others called it empire. But no one yet feared America, not the way they would, not until August 1945. The world was already shattered. World War II had killed tens of millions. Cities across Europe and Asia lay in ruin. But then, 2 American planes rose into the sky. One flew to Hiroshima, the other to Nagasaki, and with 2 flashes of white light, the world changed forever. The atomic bomb was not just a weapon, it was a message. A nation could now erase a city in seconds, and only America had that power. Photographs of the mushroom cloud burned themselves into the minds of every general on every continent. Children in Europe dreamed of the end of days. Poets in Africa wrote about skies turned red. Survivors in Japan spoke of shadows melted into concrete. And from that moment forward, the world began to fear what America could do if it ever stopped pretending to be good. When the Second World War ended, America didn't retreat. It expanded, not through colonies, but through contracts, institutions, and intelligence. The war had destroyed the old empires, Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and into that vacuum stepped a nation that had never been bombed, never been occupied, never been humbled. America had money and muscle and the confidence of a god. In 1949, it created NATO, a military alliance that, in theory, was defensive. But to the rest of the world, NATO looked like an iron wall of Western power, one that excluded the Soviet bloc, pressured neutral nations, and threatened any country that refused to pick a side. Alongside NATO came the Marshall Plan. Billions of dollars sent to Europe to rebuild cities, restore trade, and prevent communism. But the aid came with conditions. America would decide who got money, what industries were restored, and what kind of governments were allowed to rise. In exchange for survival, Europe gave up control, and the world watched. But it wasn't enough to rebuild the visible world. America needed control behind the scenes, and so in 1947 the CIA was born. The Central Intelligence Agency wasn't just a spy network, it was a covert army. Its purpose, defend American interests, anywhere, at any cost. No uniform, no public debate, just orders and silence. By the early 1950s, the CIA had agents in every major capital, pulling strings, funding newspapers, tapping phones, planning coups, all in the name of stability, all in the name of peace, but always with American power at the center. In 1953, a nation halfway across the world dared to choose its own future. Iran. Its prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, wasn't a radical. He wasn't violent. He was democratically elected. His crime? He wanted to nationalize Iran's oil, take it back from British control, use it to build schools, hospitals, roads. The West called it socialism. America called it unacceptable. And so, the CIA moved. In Operation Ajax, American agents bribed newspapers, spread false stories, paid off generals, and staged riots. The streets of Tehran boiled with violence, engineered from Washington. Mossadegh was arrested, a puppet Shah was installed, oil flowed west again, and a template was born. 1 year later, Guatemala, 1954. The president there, Jacobo Arbenz, wanted to give unused land back to peasants. That land belonged to the United Fruit Company, an American corporation. So once again, the CIA intervened. Planes dropped leaflets. Tanks appeared at the border. Fake radio broadcasts faked a revolution, and the people, terrified, watched their leader flee. Over the next 2 decades, this pattern would repeat. Chile, Congo, Brazil, Indonesia, Dominican Republic. Wherever a nation dared to resist American corporations, American military bases, or American ideology, it was branded a threat, a communist, a danger to freedom. And freedom, it turned out, meant the freedom to serve U.S. interests. The world began to see a truth too large to ignore. America didn't just protect democracy, it decided where democracy would live and where it would die. Vietnam was never about Vietnam. It was about fear. Fear that if one country chose socialism, others would follow. A domino theory crafted in think tanks and enforced by bombs. And so America sent advisors, then troops, then tanks, then napalm. Between 1964 and 1975, over 3 million Vietnamese were killed. Entire villages wiped out, fields poisoned with Agent Orange, children born with twisted limbs, skin lesions, brain damage from chemicals designed for leaves but dropped on lungs. But Vietnam was only the beginning. In Laos, America launched more bombs than all sides dropped during Wadi. On a neutral country, farmers woke up to cluster munitions. Schools exploded, and to this day, Laotians are still killed by unexploded ordnance left beneath their fields. In Cambodia, secret bombings created a power vacuum, one that led directly to the rise of the Khmer Rouge, a regime that murdered nearly 2 million of its own citizens. All of it because America feared losing influence, because American credibility, they said, was more important than foreign lives. By the 1970s, the world had seen what it meant to resist American will. Even if you were small, even if you were peaceful, even if you only asked to be left alone, America would come. And when it did, it came with fire. After Vietnam, America changed tactics. War had become expensive, bloody, televised. But power didn't need to look like tanks anymore. It could look like aid, loans, development. And that's when economic warfare became the silent killer. But enter the IMF and the World Bank, 2 global institutions, largely shaped by U.S. interests. They offered loans to the developing world on paper to help. But the fine print told another story. In exchange for money, countries had to cut social programs, privatize national resources, open their markets to Western goods, and slash labor protections. They called them structural adjustment programs. But to the people living through them, they were recipes for hunger, riots, and collapse. In Jamaica, US-backed IMF loans destroyed local farming. Cheap American imports flooded the market. Rice farmers couldn't compete. They left their fields, and hunger grew. In Zambia, public hospitals were gutted, nurses laid off, medicine disappeared. In Argentina, entire generations fell into poverty as austerity swallowed the middle class. And in every case, American corporations thrived. These weren't bombs, but they killed. They weren't invasions, but they conquered. Because when a country defaults, its sovereignty dissolves, and the lender decides what people eat, what services survive, and how much their lives are worth on an international spreadsheet. The weapon wasn't steel anymore. It was debt. and it left no battlefield to bury the dead, only broken economies and angry ghosts. After 9/11, the world mourned with America. Flags flew half-mast. Leaders wept on television. But behind the grief came a choice. War without limits. America called it the War on Terror, but it quickly became a war on geography, law, and truth. In 2001, American troops invaded Afghanistan. In 2003, they invaded Iraq. But within a decade, U.S. strikes were landing in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Syria. These weren't declared wars. They were drone operations, special forces, raids, targeted assassinations, no jury, no trial. Just a name on a list, and a missile from the sky. In rural Pakistan, weddings were struck, funerals, mosques, sometimes whole villages. In Yemen, a 16-year-old American citizen killed by drone. No evidence, no charges, just a signature strike. Wrong place, wrong time. And when asked why, we're fighting terror. The drones didn't sleep. They hovered, buzzing above cities like ghosts. Children stopped going to school. Families refused to gather, because at any moment, the sky could split open, and the trigger was pulled from an office building in Nevada. For to the world, America had become something new. Not just a nation, but an eye in the sky, a hand on the red button, a presence that couldn't be seen, only feared. It didn't need to occupy, or threaten, or declare. It simply watched. And when it wanted, it ended you. After the towers fell, America demanded justice. But somewhere along the way, justice became revenge. And revenge needed tools that couldn't exist in daylight, so they built black sites. Secret prisons, hidden inside Allies' borders, Poland, Lithuania, Thailand, Romania, Egypt, Jordan. Each facility operated outside American soil to avoid American law. Inside, there were no Miranda rights, no Geneva Conventions, only silence, only noise. They called it enhanced interrogation. But what they meant was waterboarding, sensory deprivation, sleep torture, mock executions, rectal feeding, shackling for days in stress positions. Some detainees were guilty, many were not. Some were sold for cash. Bounty hunters delivering strangers in exchange for US dollars. One man was taken for having the same name as a suspected terrorist. He was tortured for months. When released, he couldn't speak. Even high-ranking US officials would later admit some of these men never should have been held. But the machine was running, and fear was the fuel. And what made it worse, what made it more terrifying, was that no one was punished. The program was made public. Senate reports were written. Journalists uncovered everything. But the architects of this secret horror, they retired, wrote books, advised presidents. Because in America, impunity is often more powerful than guilt. The message to the world was clear. We can do whatever we want, anywhere, and no one will stop us. And so the fear deepened, not because America lied, but because it didn't have to anymore. Every year, the United States spends more on its military than the next 10 nations combined. But not all of that money stays at home. Because America is not just the world's superpower, it is the world's largest arms dealer. And the wars don't wait. From 2001 to 2021, the U.S. sold over $1.3 trillion in weapons to over 165 countries. Tanks to Saudi Arabia, helicopters to Egypt, missiles to Taiwan, guns to Colombia, drones to the UAE in the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. American weapons shape insurgencies, topple governments, and redraw borders. Sometimes those weapons are used against America's enemies, other times against civilians. In Yemen, Saudi pilots trained by the US used American bombs to strike school buses, weddings, and hospitals. In Mexico, cartels wield US-manufactured rifles, many smuggled or even lost during covert US operations. In Syria, American weapons ended up in the hands of ISIS after proxy fighters switched sides. And the response? A shrug, a statement, a denial. Because for America, once the arms are sold, the war belongs to someone else. The arms trade is cloaked in policy language: defense cooperation, regional security, counter-terrorism. But what it really means is that profit flows even when blood does. To other countries, this isn't just indifference, it's calculated violence. And the message is loud. Even if we don't fight you, we can arm your enemy. And often, we already have. Sanctions sound clean. They don't explode. They don't burn. They don't leave shrapnel. But make no mistake, sanctions kill. And America has made them a central tool of foreign policy, used to punish, pressure, or collapse governments that defy its interests. From Cuba to Iran, Venezuela to North Korea, Iraq to Syria, entire populations have been placed under economic siege. The goal? To make life so hard, so miserable, so starved, that their leaders break. But it's rarely the leaders who suffer. It's the sick, the elderly, the poor. In Iraq, during the 1990s, US-led sanctions caused catastrophic shortages of medicine and food. Hospitals ran out of antibiotics. Infant mortality doubled. Water treatment chemicals were blocked, leading to mass outbreaks of cholera and dysentery. A 1995 UN report estimated over 500,000 Iraqi children died from preventable causes due to sanctions. When asked if the price was worth it, a US official responded, "We think the price is worth it." In Venezuela, sanctions on oil and banking crippled imports. Malnutrition rose, surgeries were canceled, cancer patients couldn't access chemo. In Iran, sanctions blocked critical medications. Parents scavenged for black market insulin. Hospitals reused surgical tools. Even after nuclear talks, the restrictions returned. To the world, these are not policy decisions. They are siege warfare without the tanks, a silent assault, a slow bleed, a way to break a country without ever setting foot inside it. And the fear it generates is unique, because it's legal, it's invisible, and no one can fight back. You can't shoot at a blocked shipment. You can't bomb a frozen bank account. You just wait and die slower. Long before you wake up, your phone has already pinged a dozen towers. Your location is triangulated, your patterns stored, and chances are an American agency knows. Because the United States didn't just master weapons, or diplomacy, or sanctions, it mastered surveillance. In 2013, a former NSA contractor named Edward Snowden revealed something terrifying. America had built a global spying network so vast, so invasive, that it could track almost anyone, anywhere, at any time. Emails, phone calls, search history, webcam feeds, social media, even conversations on private apps. All monitored under programs like PRISM and XKeyscore. And not just Americans. Foreign presidents were tapped. Allied leaders were monitored. United Nations servers were hacked. The justification? National security. The NSA didn't do it alone. With help from the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, a coalition known as Five Eyes, the surveillance stretched globally. Data harvested from undersea cables, metadata extracted from satellites, private servers infiltrated without a trace. Even encryption wasn't safe, because America helped design many of the algorithms used to protect global communication. And what America designs, America can break. To other nations, this wasn't just intelligence, it was domination, digital colonization, a quiet control where no army is needed, just code. And once again, America was untouchable. No court could reach them, no law could bind them, no privacy could shield you. Because to the architects of surveillance, fear is security. And if the world must be watched to keep America safe, so be it. The image of a coup used to be blunt: generals, gunfire, a flag burning on the ground. But in the new world, coercion wears a cleaner face, and America adapted. In Honduras, 2009, a democratically elected president, Manuel Zelaya, was overthrown by the military. His crime? He suggested a constitutional referendum that could threaten elite economic interests, including US-aligned businesses. American diplomats condemned the violence publicly, but quietly legitimized the new regime. Aid flowed, contracts resumed, the world moved on. Now in Libya, 2011, a no-fly zone turned into total regime change. Muammar Gaddafi, once a dictator courted by Western leaders, was bombed into oblivion. The country collapsed. Militias took over. Open-air slave markets emerged. America declared victory. But Libya was fractured forever. In Egypt, 2013, a military coup ousted the first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi. Massacres followed. Protesters shot by the hundreds. Opposition silenced. But the new military leader, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, received billions in US military aid because stability, in Washington's eyes, was more important than justice. These weren't Cold War relics. They were blueprints, perfected, streamlined, repeated in Venezuela, Bolivia, Sudan, Ukraine. Accusations of interference, covert funding, and soft power coups resurfaced again and again, some true, some murky. But the message was always the same. You can govern your country as long as we approve. To the world, this is what American fear looks like now. Not a declaration, not a bomb, but a quiet call, a frozen account, a whisper in a general's ear. And suddenly a nation changes course or collapses. Every empire has a justification. Rome had civilization. Britain had the burden of empire. And America? America had destiny. From its founding, the story was etched in scripture, taught in classrooms, whispered in campaigns. We are the city on the hill, the beacon of freedom, the last best hope of Earth. But what happens when that belief turns into blindness? To most Americans, wars are fought for liberty. Interventions are done to save. Power is earned, not imposed. But to the rest of the world, this isn't belief, it's denial. Denial of Hiroshima, of coups, of torture, of starvation by sanctions. Denial of the dark shadow that follows the flag. When other nations look at America, they don't see a savior. They see a machine that believes it can do no wrong. And that belief makes it more dangerous. Because if every bomb is righteous, who counts the bodies? If every enemy is evil, who gets to tell their story? If every act is just, then justice dies unseen. This is what makes the fear so complete. Not just the weapons, not just the money, not just the reach, but the certainty, the absolute belief that no matter the destruction, America is still the hero, even when the mirror says otherwise. Long after the troops leave, the wounds remain, not in governments, not in headlines, but in people, in the children born after the bombings, in the parents buried beneath debt, in the silence where names used to be. This is America's legacy, felt in places the news no longer films. In Vietnam, children born decades after the war still suffer from deformities caused by Agent Orange. Landmines and cluster bombs still kill farmers and school children. Entire families live in fear of what lies beneath the soil. In Iraq, the invasion ended years ago, but chaos didn't. Electricity is unreliable. Water is often poisoned. ISIS rose from the ruins of war. A monster birthed by instability and fed by drone strikes. In Afghanistan, after 20 years of occupation, America left overnight. Hospitals shuttered, food vanished, girls were banned from schools, and the people left behind were those who had once believed the U.S. would help them build a future. Across Latin America, generations remember the dictators armed, trained, and supported by Washington. In Chile, the screams of Pinochet's prisons. In Guatemala, mass graves from scorched earth campaigns. In El Salvador, the legacy of death squads, all part of the Cold War playbook, all paid for by American taxpayers. These scars aren't just historical, they're lived, felt, inherited. When a child in Syria fears the sky, that fear was taught. When a grandmother in Laos weeps at the sound of thunder, that memory isn't hers, it was passed down. Fear, like trauma, becomes generational. And that fear carries a name, America. You don't need to cross an ocean to enter American territory. You're likely carrying it already. In your hand, in your home, in your mind. Because modern U.S. power isn't only military, it's digital, economic, ubiquitous. American corporations are the arteries of the global economy. Google dominates search. Apple shapes the smartphone market. Microsoft runs the backbones of governments and banks. Amazon controls global logistics. Meta shapes how billions communicate. These aren't just companies. They are infrastructures, gatekeepers, unregulated powers, answerable not to voters, but to shareholders and U.S. courts. When countries try to resist, they're often punished. France attempted to tax digital giants, and the U.S. threatened tariffs. India tried to regulate data storage and faced corporate pressure and diplomatic cold shoulders. China, Russia, and Iran built firewalls, not just to censor, but to escape. Because in this new world, data is dependence, and dependence means control. Even when a war isn't being fought, America's tools are everywhere. Software built in Silicon Valley, GPS signals from U.S. military satellites, cloud storage on servers monitored by American intelligence laws. Foreign companies must comply with U.S. export restrictions. Allies are subject to sanctions if they do business with the wrong state. And entire countries, like Cuba or North Korea, are simply locked out of the global digital economy. This isn't war, but it is domination, soft, quiet, total. To the outside world, resisting American policy isn't just dangerous, it's economically suicidal. You don't need a bullet to take down a government. Sometimes you just deny it bandwidth. A nation doesn't drop bombs without leaving shrapnel in its own soul. And America, for all its power abroad, is a country haunted at home. Because the violence doesn't stop at the border. It mutates, disguises itself, and infects the very citizens it claims to protect. Endless war abroad created a military-industrial complex that never stops growing. It swallows budgets meant for schools, infrastructure, healthcare. It breeds paranoia, spending billions to prepare for threats that often never arrive. It celebrates war in films, video games, politics, glorifying weapons while neglecting peace. The surveillance state built for terrorists now watches Americans, too. Phone records, online history, social media behavior. Justified under laws meant to track foreign enemies, now used to monitor domestic dissent. The same militarized police tactics once tested in Baghdad now appear in Ferguson, in Minneapolis, in Los Angeles. Surplus military gear floods American cities. SWAT teams raid homes over unpaid fines. Tear gas, once banned in war, used on protesters in U.S. streets. And the culture of fear? It feeds division, fuels extremism, creates enemies from within. Immigrants, Muslims, black communities, leftists, whistleblowers, each portrayed as a threat to order, to safety, to the fragile image of greatness. This is the price of empire without reflection. Power becomes paranoia. Dominance becomes dependency. And the war machine, once unleashed, doesn't ask where the battlefield ends. After World War II, the world tried to build something better. The United Nations, the Geneva Conventions, the International Criminal Court, a framework for peace, rules of engagement, global accountability, but rules only matter if everyone plays by them, and one country, again and again, refuses to be bound. When the International Criminal Court considered investigating U.S. troops for war crimes in Afghanistan, America responded not with cooperation, but with threats. Sanctions were placed on ICC officials, visas were revoked, and a clear message was sent: we will not be judged. When Israel bombed Gaza, killing civilians, leveling schools and hospitals, the U.S. blocked resolutions at the UN dozens of times. When Saudi Arabia dismembered a journalist in a foreign embassy, the U.S. issued statements, but sold weapons anyway. When American-made bombs strike Yemeni civilians, the response is silence. Even in environmental law, America remains an outlier. It refused to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. It withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, only to rejoin under pressure. And when international bodies try to regulate corporate behavior, digital privacy, or global tax evasion, America often intervenes not to protect people, but to protect profit. This is not diplomacy, this is dominion, because when one nation can ignore every court, every council, every treaty, the message is simple: we are the law. And to those living under the weight of U.S. power, that's not justice, that's fear. Every generation is raised on stories, and in the modern world, most of those stories come from one place: Hollywood, the factory of dreams, where violence becomes heroism and war becomes noble, if it's America pulling the trigger. From World War II to the War on Terror, American cinema has painted a world in black and white. Cowboys and savages, good guys and terrorists, freedom and chaos. And when your country appears, if it appears, it's usually in flames. This isn't accidental. The Pentagon and CIA have worked with filmmakers for decades, offering access to equipment, locations, and funding. The price? Script approval. Movies like Top Gun, Zero Dark 30, and Transformers were shaped not just by directors, but by defense officials, weapons on screen, recruiters in the credits. But it's not just movies, music, fashion, YouTube, TikTok. The language of American power is wrapped in denim beats and charisma. You wear it, you dance to it, you trust it. And somewhere in that trust, history vanishes. Oh, you don't see the coups, you don't hear the drone, you don't remember the sanctions that starved children in Iraq. Instead, you get the myth. We're flawed, but we try. We fight for good. We lead the free world. And for many, that's enough. Until it's not. Because the world is waking up. Global South voices are rising. Colonial histories are being retold. American narratives are being questioned. In classrooms, on screens, in protests. But the machine keeps churning. And for now, America still controls the spotlight, even if it's pointed away from the blood. August 6th, 1945. The sun rose over Hiroshima. Children walked to school. Mothers cleaned their kitchens. Doctors began morning rounds. At 8:15 a.m., the sky opened, and a weapon forged in American labs reduced a city to shadows. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Another flash. Another city vaporized. Over 200,000 lives. In a moment. Skin melted. Bones vanished. Eyes boiled in their sockets. And for the first time, the world understood what America was capable of. Since that day, no nation has used nuclear weapons in war. But America, the only country that has, refuses to rule it out. Its arsenal remains vast. Its submarines, loaded. Its bombers, patrolling. Presidents, any president, can authorize a strike in minutes. No court, no Congress, no delay. Just one order, and cities burn. And it's not just the threat of use. It's the threat of denial. When other nations try to build deterrence, like Iran or North Korea, they are threatened, sanctioned, isolated. But when America expands its arsenal, it is called modernizing. When others test a missile, it's provocation. When America does it, it's deterrence. The fear isn't just in the bomb. It's in the double standard. The sense that one country holds the key to annihilation and answers to no one. For decades, nations have begged for disarmament, for treaties, for balance. But American officials respond with caution, then expansion, new warheads, faster delivery, first strike options left on the table. And so the world lives under the shadow of one nation's hand, hovering over the button. Money doesn't just move markets, it moves nations. And in today's world, almost all of it flows through the United States. This is not by accident, it's by design. Because America doesn't just own the most powerful military, it owns the currency of the earth. Nearly 90% of global trade touches the US dollar, from oil contracts to international loans to the reserves in foreign central banks. Even countries hostile to the US still depend on its currency. Why? Because after World War II, America helped build the global economic system and made itself the center. SWIFT, the international payment network, runs through US monitoring. The World Bank and IMF, headquartered in Washington, are heavily shaped by American policy. Even Visa and MasterCard can shut down services to entire nations when US sanctions are triggered. It's not just pressure, it's chokehold diplomacy. In Iran, being cut from the dollar system collapsed the rial, spiked inflation, and froze medicine imports. In Russia, sanctions locked out banks, severed transaction channels, and crippled business in weeks. In Venezuela, the financial isolation deepened hunger and chaos. These aren't just numbers, they're lifelines, and the US controls the faucet. To many nations, this isn't economics, it's weaponized finance, a war fought in spreadsheets, bank terminals, and regulatory offices. A single policy from the US Treasury can devastate a foreign economy faster than any airstrike. And worst of all, there's no way to retaliate. You can't bomb Wall Street. You can't sanction the dollar. You can only comply or collapse. That's why the fear runs so deep. Because even without touching a single soldier, America can still make a country bleed. Most countries protect their borders. America protects the world. Or so it says. But in truth, no other nation has a footprint this vast, this permanent, this inescapable. Over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries, from Japan to Germany, from Qatar to Djibouti, from Guam to Guantanamo. Many of these bases were built during World War II or the Cold War. But the wars ended. The bases didn't. They became fixtures, landmarks, sometimes scars. In Okinawa, American bases have sparked protests for decades. Due to crime, noise, and pollution. In Italy, locals near bases complain of environmental contamination and aircraft crashes. In South Korea, massive U.S. installations remain, just miles from the DMZ, a permanent reminder the war never truly ended. These aren't just defense posts. They are projections of power. Each base carries radar systems, missile defense, airfields for bombers, and storage for nuclear weapons. They allow America to deploy force anywhere in the world, within hours. They monitor allies. They pressure adversaries. And most of all, they ensure the world is always in reach. But countries that host them often have little say. Local governments sign agreements, but populations resist. And once a base is built, it rarely leaves. It becomes part of the terrain, of the landscape, of the occupation in everything but name. Even allies know, if the U.S. wants to act, it doesn't ask. Because the troops are already there, the planes are already fueled, the intelligence already gathered. Fear, at that point, is not about invasion. It's about what happens when resistance is no longer an option. You don't hear it at first, just the distant buzz, like a fly, like a prayer. Then it gets louder, then it vanishes, then something explodes. This is life in the drone zone. And for thousands, it's a life without safety, without sleep, without ski. Since 2004, the United States has launched thousands of drone strikes in countries it never declared war on. Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. Some targets were confirmed militants, others were guesses, or victims of proximity, or wedding guests. The strikes come from kill lists, approved in secret by a handful of officials, sometimes even by the president himself. No trial, no jury, just a name, a suspicion, a death. One program, known as signature strikes, allowed hits based not on identity, but behavior. Walking in a pattern, carrying a phone, meeting with the wrong person, and when the strike hits, the bodies are labeled as enemy combatants unless proven otherwise, even if they were children. In Waziristan, families began sleeping underground. Children refused to go to school. Funerals were bombed, so were first responders, because double taps, hitting the same site twice, ensured fear stayed permanent. The psychological toll is immeasurable. People afraid to gather, afraid to farm, afraid to speak. The sky, once a source of hope, of weather, of peace, became a weapon. To the outside world, this isn't just warfare. It's God-mode death, remote, unaccountable, unstoppable. A video feed decides if you live, and if you don't, no one answers for it. Information is a battlefield, and America has long mastered it. While the world thinks of spies as shadows, the most dangerous agents don't carry guns. They write scripts, they manage leaks, they fund voices, and their fingerprints are all over the news you trust. The CIA, since its inception, has operated not just as an intelligence agency, but a narrative machine. During the Cold War, it infiltrated media outlets across Europe and Latin America, planting stories, funding friendly journalists, silencing dissenting voices. Operations like Mockingbird saw American news agencies used as cover for intelligence work, and it never truly stopped. Today, the methods are cleaner, more corporate, more digital. The US funds media networks abroad under the banner of democracy. It supports exiled journalists, but only from adversarial states. It trains influencers, boosts propaganda that aligns with policy, and buries what doesn't. In places like Ukraine, Venezuela, Iran, the narrative war is relentless. Protests are covered, but only certain ones. Atrocities are highlighted, unless committed by allies. Whistleblowers are heroes, unless they leak American crimes. Even entertainment isn't immune. The Pentagon works with Hollywood to script war films, to adjust portrayals, to ensure America remains the flawed but righteous protagonist. Meanwhile, platforms like Facebook, X, and YouTube partner with intelligence-adjacent firms to label, throttle, or remove content deemed harmful to national interest. Whose interest? Guess. And while foreign nations scramble to censor, spin, or influence, America's media machine makes it look effortless. Because it's not just censorship, it's curation. You don't know what you're not told, and what you are told often comes pre-approved, wrapped in a flag, branded with a logo, delivered with a smile. To be allied with America is not always to feel safe. Sometimes it's to live in the shadow of a giant who never forgets who's in charge. NATO. Bilateral agreements, defense pacts, security councils, all dressed as partnership, but often felt as dependency. Like Germany, whose requests to stop hosting US nuclear weapons are ignored. Ask South Korea, where thousands of American troops remain, decades after war, dictating local policy, igniting protests. Ask Japan, where entire prefectures are shaped by the hum of foreign aircraft and the fear of being dragged into someone else's war. American partnership often means hosting troops, buying American weapons, supporting US policy at the UN, staying silent on American mistakes. And if you don't, expect pressure, expect tariffs, expect leaked phone calls, expect a visit from someone concerned. Turkey, a NATO ally, bought Russian defense systems and was sanctioned. France criticized a US submarine deal and had a multi-billion contract sabotaged. Canada, once neutral on foreign policy, found itself entangled in US-China tensions after arresting a Chinese executive on America's request. The message is simple. Our alliance is your leash. And still, these countries remain close, because they have to. America isn't just a partner. It's the central node, the supplier, the guardian. To challenge it risks economic ruin, military exposure, diplomatic isolation. This is the fear not of the enemy, but of the friend who always reminds you what you owe. A country's power grid flickers, bank systems freeze, missile programs collapse, and no one knows why. There are no planes in the sky, no soldiers at the border, just a virus written in Virginia, launched from Nevada, or passed through Israel. Because the United States, more than any other country, controls the Internet's nervous system, and when it chooses to strike, you may not even realize you've been hit. Take Stuxnet 2010. A cyber weapon so sophisticated, it changed everything. It didn't steal data. It destroyed physical infrastructure, Iran's nuclear centrifuges, by making them spin themselves to death. It was a digital ghost, undetectable for months. And when experts traced it back, the fingerprints pointed to American and Israeli intelligence. It was the first true cyber weapon, but not the last. Since then, American cyber capabilities have expanded beyond comprehension. Offensive units within U.S. Cyber Command, surveillance programs through NSA backdoors, tapping into undersea cables, implanting malware in foreign infrastructure just in case. Not just defense, not just spying, prepositioned dominance. When other countries know, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, all accused of cyber attacks, but none match the reach, funding, and partnerships of American cyber operations. With allies like the Five Eyes, the U.S. can monitor traffic in nearly every corner of the globe. And when a nation grows bold, their secrets have a way of leaking. Elections are watched, banks are monitored, hackers are used as pawns. Whole economies rely on software built and licensed by American firms. Updates can be altered, access can be revoked, security can become surveillance. You don't need boots on the ground when the ground is wired to you. You don't need to invade when your adversary's secrets are already yours. And that's why fear grows. Because in a world where everything is digital, America is already inside. For decades, resistance meant ruin. Challenge the US and you risked sanctions, sabotage, or worse. But now something's changing. The empire is still strong, but the world is adapting. In the financial world, the dollar's dominance is slipping. Nations like China and Russia are stockpiling gold, signing trade deals in yuan and rubles, and building systems like SIPs to rival American-controlled SWIFT. The BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, has expanded its cooperation, even proposing a new global currency outside U.S. reach. In technology, countries are building firewalls, not just to control speech, but to block American surveillance. Huawei, once a rising tech star, was crippled by sanctions. But it forced China to accelerate domestic development. Russia now has its own payment systems. India has banned dozens of US-linked apps. Even Europe is questioning digital dependence. Militarily, too, alliances shift. China and Russia conduct joint drills. Iran, long isolated, now exports drones. Turkey buys weapons from Moscow and Washington. Africa hosts Wagner mercenaries and Chinese bases. The unipolar world is fracturing, and in that fracture, resistance becomes survivable. Even among the people, there's an awakening. From Chile to Lebanon, Nigeria to France, mass protests erupt against austerity, inequality, and the systems, often backed or designed by American economists, that keep the poor in debt. These aren't just movements, they're signs. The fear is still there, but it's no longer absolute. And that's what makes this moment so volatile. Because when power starts to slip, it grips harder. And the world knows America won't give up control quietly. We've seen this before, not with fighter jets, not with drones, but with legions, triremes, scepters. Empires rise. They believe they are eternal. And then they vanish. Rome ruled with legions. It promised law and roads, but it bled its provinces dry, used mercenaries to patch over rebellion, and drowned dissent in spectacle. When it fell, it didn't happen in a single night. It happened in fragments, corruption, overreach. The barbarians didn't destroy Rome. Rome was already hollow. The British Empire covered a quarter of the globe. It boasted industry, enlightenment, and civility, while enslaving nations, fomenting famines, and redrawing borders with no regard for the people within them. It collapsed after 2 world wars revealed its moral hypocrisy. The sun set, not in fire, but in shame. Now comes America, a nation that tells itself it's not an empire. But what else do you call 750 military bases, covert regime changes, global surveillance, economic dominion, cultural saturation, the power to wage war without consequence? And like the empires before it, America faces internal decay, a crumbling infrastructure, a polarized population, a media ecosystem of delusion, billionaires richer than nations, healthcare systems that fail the sick, education systems that fail the young, externally feared, internally fracturing, just like Rome, just like Britain, just like all that came before. History doesn't end, it transfers. Power leaves one capital and finds another. The only question is, how loud is the fall? In Iraq and Afghanistan, for every American soldier, there were 3 private contractors. Many weren't American, some weren't even trained, but they carried guns, guarded convoys, interrogated prisoners, with almost no accountability. Because when America fights wars now, it often does so through corporations. Names like Blackwater, DynCorp, KBR, Academy, once whispered in classified briefings, now synonymous with shadow warfare. They protect embassies, they run logistics, they train foreign forces, they pull triggers, but when they kill civilians, they face no military trial. Often no consequences at all. In 2007, Blackwater contractors opened fire in Nisor Square, Baghdad, killing 17 civilians, including children. The world watched in horror. Investigations dragged. Convictions came years later and were ultimately pardoned by the President of the United States. This isn't just a loophole, it's a strategy. Because private military companies don't need congressional approval, can operate in legal gray zones, keep official casualty counts low, and let the government deny responsibility. Beyond the battlefield, other contractors do the same damage, quietly. Palantir runs predictive policing and battlefield analytics. Raytheon builds missiles, then advises on where to launch them. Lockheed Martin sells weapons to the Pentagon and to the countries America bombs. Profit drives policy. Lobbyists write budgets. CEOs influence diplomacy. The empire doesn't need to march. It just needs to invoice. And for the people on the ground, being shot by a soldier or by a contractor makes no difference. Death is still death. And the hand behind it still wears red, white, and blue. From childhood, Americans are taught one truth. We are the good guys. Every war is just. Every enemy is evil. Every intervention is mercy in disguise. This is American exceptionalism. The belief that the United States is not just powerful, but moral, chosen, special. It began with manifest destiny. The claim that the U.S. had a divine right to expand across the continent. It justified genocide, land theft, the displacement of millions. Then it spread outward. The Philippines, Haiti, Cuba, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, every invasion wrapped in the language of liberation, every bomb dropped with a sermon. This belief isn't just arrogance, it's dangerous. Because when a nation sees itself as uniquely moral, every atrocity becomes a mistake, not a crime. Every dead child is collateral. Every torture report is regrettable. Every failure is unfortunate, but never evil. Evil is for others. The media feeds this, schools reinforce it, Hollywood immortalizes it. Even when history contradicts it, the myth survives. Slavery was tragic, but we ended it. The atomic bomb was brutal, but it saved lives. The Vietnam War was flawed, but we meant well. Intention replaces accountability. This is what other countries fear, not just America's weapons, but its certainty. The sense that no matter what it does, it is still the hero. That's why apologies are rare. That's why international courts are rejected. That's why dissent is dismissed as unpatriotic. Because to question the myth is to question the nation itself. And in that myth, there is no room for the blood beneath the flag. They called it foreign aid, advisory support, protecting democracy. But what it really was regime change, over and over again. Iran, 1953. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized oil, so the CIA, with British help, engineered a coup. Fake protests, bribed officials, militant thugs on payroll. The Shah returned. The people suffered. The oil flowed west. Guatemala, 1954. Jacobo Arbenz attempted land reform, targeting U.S. corporations like United Fruit. The CIA stepped in. Planes bombed the capital. A military junta took power. What followed? Decades of civil war, torture, disappearances, mass graves. Congo, 1961. Patrice Lumumba, the country's first elected leader, was captured and murdered with CIA knowledge, with Belgian assistance, because he was too independent, too uncooperative with U.S. interests. Chile, 1973. Salvador Allende, a Marxist president, was overthrown in a violent coup. The U.S. funded the opposition. The military bombed the palace. General Pinochet took power, ushering in years of executions, torture, and repression. From Vietnam to Nicaragua, Honduras to Indonesia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, the fingerprints are everywhere. When leaders leaned too far left, threatened nationalization, spoke of non-alignment, they became enemies. Sometimes it was war, sometimes it was whispers, but the result was the same. Governments overthrown, puppets installed, blood spilled in the name of freedom. And yet, when history is told, these acts are erased, minimized, or justified, because to acknowledge them fully would mean admitting what America truly feared: not communism, not terrorism, but independence. When a city is bombed, what's lost isn't just lives. It's water systems, hospitals, schools, libraries, language, ritual, memory. Because war at scale doesn't just kill, it erases. In Vietnam, America dropped more bombs than in all of World War II combined. Forests were incinerated, villages flattened. Agent Orange, a chemical defoliant, poisoned generations. Even today, children are born with deformities caused by that war's legacy. In Iraq, depleted uranium munitions left behind radioactive dust. Cancer rates soared, birth defects multiplied. In Fallujah, the contamination was so severe, scientists compared it to Hiroshima. In Afghanistan, decades of war reduced cities to rubble, water supplies to sludge, and the countryside to landmine fields. Millions displaced, generations traumatized, culture fractured beyond repair. These aren't collateral damages, they're weapons of permanence. Because when a nation's infrastructure is destroyed, when doctors flee, when artists die, when children grow up in ruins, what emerges isn't peace, it's silence, a void where history used to live. Even in occupied territories like Guantanamo Bay or drone-blasted tribal regions, the trauma isn't just physical, it's psychological occupation. Sleep becomes dangerous, joy becomes guilt, and the future becomes something you're too afraid to imagine. This is why the world fears America, not just for what it fights, but for what it leaves behind. Because when the cameras leave, the rubble stays, the toxins stay, the grief stays, and the stories, they're rarely told. You don't have to be bombed to bleed. Sometimes, all it takes is for the U.S. Treasury to press a button overnight. A nation's banks freeze, its trade collapses, its people lose access to food, fuel, and medicine. No troops needed, just sanctions. Cuba, under embargo for over 6 decades, its people denied access to basic imports. From construction materials to medical equipment, the economy starves, hospitals struggle, and still the blockade remains. Why? Because Cuba chose independence. Iraq, 1990s. Following the Gulf War, sanctions devastated the civilian population. Estimates say over 500,000 children died due to lack of food and medicine. Asked about this, a U.S. official famously said, "We think the price is worth it." Venezuela. Sanctions triggered hyperinflation, wiped out basic supplies, and turned a wealthy oil nation into a country begging for insulin. Iran. Cut off from the SWIFT system, blocked from selling oil, hospitals unable to access cancer drugs, even during a pandemic. Sanctions kill, but quietly, without sirens, without smoke. These measures are framed as tools of diplomacy, leverage, justice, but on the ground, they mean malnutrition, unemployment, medical collapse, suicide. And because the global economy runs on dollars, America doesn't need permission, no UN vote, no international court, just a list, a target, and pressure that breaks bones without ever raising a weapon. The world fears America not just for what it does directly, but for how easily it can make others suffer indirectly. There are no tanks on this front, no generals, no borders, just signals, broadcasts, algorithms. Welcome to psychological operations, where the weapon is not a gun, but a story. The U.S. military and intelligence community have long used psyops to shape perception. In Vietnam, leaflets were dropped to demoralize soldiers. In Iraq, rumors were planted to fracture insurgent cells. In Latin America, radio stations and fake newspapers sowed doubt, fear, and submission. But today, it's digital, social media bots, influencer manipulation, shadow accounts spreading division. What was once analog is now instant, global, and invisible. And it doesn't stop at foreign targets. At home, narratives are curated carefully. Wars are sold with fear, surveillance with safety, sanctions with justice, empire with silence if you question it. You're labeled unpatriotic, a conspiracy theorist, a danger. But every war begins with a story, a reason to bomb, a reason to sanction, a reason to look away. That story is crafted, focus grouped, pushed through compliant media, draped in stars and stripes. Even the idea of freedom has been weaponized, invoked to justify occupation, to silence protest, to rewrite laws. The result is chilling, a public that supports its own erosion, a world that no longer knows which parts of the truth are real. This is why the fear remains, because the line between reality and narrative has been deliberately blurred. And when belief itself is a weapon, there is no safe ground left. History is a weapon, not just in what's told, but in what's left out. In the United States, the most violent truths often vanish before they're ever taught. Ask the average citizen, what happened in Tulsa, 1921? A thriving black community burned, hundreds massacred. Airplanes dropped incendiaries on American citizens, never taught in most schools until a century later. Ask about COINTELPRO, the FBI's domestic program that surveilled, infiltrated, and sabotaged civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, even Martin Luther King Jr. silenced, buried in classified documents, labeled as necessary for national security. Ask about the Philippines, where U.S. forces waterboarded rebels, burned villages, and killed hundreds of thousands. Ask about Honduras, El Salvador, Cambodia, Panama, where U.S.-backed regimes disappeared the dissidents and blamed the ashes on communism. These are not footnotes. They are foundations, and yet most Americans never hear them because the past is sanitized, heroes are polished, victims are forgotten, and the next generation grows up believing in a cleaner, kinder empire than ever existed. Meanwhile, memorials glorify wars, textbooks flatten rebellions, Hollywood paints soldiers as saints, and apologies almost never, because acknowledgement would mean dismantling the myth, and the myth is everything. This is why other nations fear America, not just for what it does, but for what it refuses to admit. Because a nation that won't face its past cannot be trusted with the future. You can trace the shape of U.S. foreign policy not just in maps, but in migrations. Refugees don't come from nowhere. They come from war zones, collapsed economies, failed states, and all too often those crises carry an American signature. Iraq. Before 2003, it was authoritarian, but stable. After the invasion, chaos, civil war, ISIS, millions displaced. By 2015, 1 in 6 Iraqis had fled their homes. Afghanistan. Decades of U.S. intervention turned mountains into graveyards. The Taliban returned stronger than ever, and the people paid the price. By 2021, over 6 million Afghans were living as refugees or internally displaced. Honduras, once targeted by American-backed coups, now plagued by gang violence, corruption, and economic collapse. Thousands flee north each year, only to be criminalized at the U.S. border. Syria. While multiple powers intervened, America's support for armed factions and prolonged civil war helped fuel a displacement crisis not seen since World War II. Over 13 million Syrians uprooted. These are not isolated cases. They are systemic consequences of drone strikes, of puppet governments, of economic strangulation, of liberation gone wrong. And yet, when these refugees seek safety, they're met with barbed wire. Travel bans, detention centers. The same nation that helped destroy their homes now guards its borders with righteous denial. This is how fear spreads, not just in the lands America touches, but in the message it sends. We can unmake your world, but we will not welcome you into ours. The streets of Baghdad, the hills of Kandahar, the neighborhoods of Baltimore, different maps, same methods, because the empire doesn't end at the border. It boomerangs, and what the U.S. perfects overseas is later deployed against its own. But after decades of counterinsurgency, America's police became militarized, tanks on city streets, helicopters over protests, rubber bullets, tear gas, flashbangs, all once tools of war, now standard for crowd control. Programs like 1033 transferred billions in surplus military gear to local law enforcement. The result? Small towns with sniper rifles, suburbs with SWAT teams, all trained to see neighborhoods not as communities, but as combat zones. The surveillance state grew too. Drones once used to hunt in Yemen now patrol the U.S. border. Facial recognition trained on foreign enemies now scans airports, subways, and protests. The NSA, exposed by whistleblowers, collects bulk data on millions of citizens without warrants. Even dissent is treated as threat. Whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden are exiled or imprisoned. Journalists are surveilled. Activists labeled extremists. Protest becomes risk. Silence becomes survival. This is the cost of global dominance. You begin to rule yourself the way you ruled others. The American public, taught to believe in liberty, now lives beneath the shadow of its own war machine. The same machine other nations have feared for decades. Power never fades peacefully. It clings, it claws, it corrupts, and eventually it collapses, not because someone takes it, but because it's too bloated to stand. With America, for all its strength, stands at a precipice, its economy strained, its people divided, its wars unwon, its dominance questioned. The world watches, some with dread, others with hope. Because an empire in decline is often the most dangerous. History doesn't offer comfort, it offers warnings. Rome scorched its borders before it fell. Britain clung to colonies long after they had become burdens. And America, it still builds bases, still stokes conflicts, still exports ideology wrapped in righteousness. But there are signs of shift, multipolar alliances forming, currencies decoupling, technologies escaping US control, and people everywhere beginning to ask, what if the American century is already over? For those who fear America, the fear may change shape. It may no longer be about bombs or sanctions or soldiers. It may become a fear of what comes next, a power vacuum, a new empire, or chaos, because when the Colossus stumbles, everything around it trembles. And still, America remains, feared, revered, unmatched in force, but fragile, haunted by its history, challenged by its contradictions, an empire with no end date, but with many endings waiting.